Man dead in a garage. She screamed until her voice cracked, realizing he used her as human bait. He sat perfectly still, calmly wiping blood from his suit. When she ran out of breath, he didn't apologize. He just looked at her stomach and asked the one question she thought was a secret. How many weeks? Welcome back to the shadows. Today, you and I are going to walk through a mafia drama where a single misplaced word completely rewires a bloodline. In this brutal underworld, silence is the only way to survive a kingpin like Corrado Malacan. To him, Sarafina is just a nameless waitress. He tosses out a vile insult, expecting it to vanish into the noisy room. Instead, she shatters his reality, firing back in flawless, razor-sharp Sicilian, looking him dead in the eye and calling him a fool. His reaction is worse than rage. It is a terrifying, quiet smile as he asks her to repeat it. It brings us to a profound lesson. We often try to outrun our past, but fleeing from a predator who does not yet know you carry his unborn child is a deadly survival game. Let us set the stage for the most dangerous encounter of her tragic life. Picture the heavy, freezing plastic curtains slapping against Sarafina as she forces her way through the back room of an ordinary fish market. Hidden just behind the humming industrial freezers is the Cortil Rosso, an underground dining room suffocating beneath the weight of its own dark secrets. She squeezes down a narrow, dimly lit hallway, and the brutal heat of the kitchen strikes her chest like a physical blow. The room is packed for a Wednesday night, the dark wooden tables sweating with years of quiet extortion and unrecorded debts. It leaves us with a necessary lesson. Sometimes life forces you to walk into rooms built to break you, but you always carry enough fire inside to burn your own way out. For 3 grueling years, she has survived this brutal mafia environment by perfecting the art of being completely invisible. She sweeps the floors, keeps her head down, and pretends the violent whispers of the underworld are just static on a broken radio. Slipping into a cramped, windowless locker room, she furiously chews on dry ginger cookies she smuggled in her coat pocket. Her manager assumes she struggles with low blood pressure. Her coworker Juicy simply thinks she has a massive, sweet tooth. They are all entirely blind to the tragic truth. There is a simple wisdom here. People only ever see the mask you are willing to show them. Those stale cookies are her absolute only shield against the violent waves of morning sickness as she holds her stomach in the freezing dark. 10 agonizing weeks. That is how long she has been carrying this ticking time bomb directly into the jaws of the lion, night after night. Her mind constantly replays the image of cold bathroom tiles and the sheer terror of staring at those 2 pink lines. The heaviest burden of this Greek tragedy is the profound isolation. The man who planted this seed has vanished like smoke in the winter wind, leaving her entirely alone in the dark. It forces a harsh reality on us. Ultimately, you have to be your own savior, because waiting for a hero will only leave you broken. She is all this unborn child has left. Taking a slow, trembling breath, she loosely ties an apron bought 2 sizes too big to hide the slight curve of her stomach, stepping back into the violent chaos of the room. The evening kicks off with the messy, chaotic rhythm of loud men shouting at a soccer game. But the shadowed booth in the back remains entirely empty, treated by everyone as cursed ground. Right at midnight, the oxygen in the room evaporates. 4 men push through the heavy curtains with the slow, terrifying arrogance that only accompanies true danger. Sarafina immediately recognizes the brutal enforcers who run the docks, alongside a 3rd man blending into the darkness. But the 4th man sits down like a dark king claiming his throne. She does not need to hear his name. The heavy gold ring on his rigid hand screams exactly who he is. It is a vital life lesson. Always pay attention to the quiet ones, because true power never needs to raise its voice to control the room. A steel blade crossing an olive branch, the signature mark of Corrado Malacan. She has poured drinks for this mobster half a dozen times, playing the invisible servant while his cold eyes stared right through her, but he has never emerged from the shadows this late at night. Juicy bumps her trembling arm, handing over a tray with terrifying instructions. The boss wants her, and only her. As she walks slowly toward the booth, the men drop their standard Italian. They shift into a thick, gravelly Sicilian dialect designed to keep all outsiders completely in the dark. But fate writes a tragic script. It is the exact dialect her grandmother forced her to learn. This is a powerful reminder. Never dismiss the traditions of your elders, because those forgotten roots might become your only armor. You and I have probably learned this the hard way, but silence is often the sharpest weapon in any war. Her grandmother gave her the ultimate rule for surviving dangerous men. If you understand their secret language, you bite your tongue and you listen. She spent her childhood acting like a naive sponge, absorbing dirty family secrets, while the adults assumed she was clueless. She has run that exact same survival play here for 3 years. She speaks intentionally broken Italian, letting these violent men write her off as an uneducated ghost. It proves a brilliant point. Letting your enemies vastly underestimate your intelligence is the best way to stay alive. She unloads the tray with steady hands, pouring heavy liquor and whiskey, while the ghost in the corner simply watches. Notice how the mafia boss has not even ordered a single drop of water yet. As Serafina leans across the dark wood to pour a glass, Rivero casually throws out a filthy, degrading comment in his secret dialect, mocking her thickening waistline hidden beneath the oversized apron. You can practically see her knuckles turning absolute white around the heavy pitcher, yet her hands remain perfectly steady. She embodies a crucial life lesson here. Burning your anger in a moment of pure reaction only hands your power over to the person mocking you. But then, Corrado finally moves. He slowly lifts his heavy gaze, and his eyes are endless, freezing voids. A jagged scar near his lip stretches into a hollow, predatory smile as he delivers a soul-crushing insult in flawless Sicilian. He stares directly at her stomach and quietly mutters that he would devour her whole, leaving nothing behind but bone. Rivero barks out a cruel, jagged laugh, while Nardo joins in with a trashy whistle. Amazingly, Serafina sets the final glass down without shattering the fragile crystal. She wipes her damp palms against her apron and finally locks her terrified eyes with the devil himself. Corrado sits back with unbearable arrogance, utterly convinced he is untouchable. But here is the hard truth for today. When someone tries to shrink you down to nothing, sometimes the absolute only way to survive is to bare your teeth and bite back. Taking a shallow breath, she tells him in perfect, stinging Sicilian that he is a massive idiot with a pretty face. The laughter instantly dies. Nardo snaps his head around so violently you would think a gunshot just rang out. Even the silent enforcer in the corner lets a dark smirk slip. But Corrado completely short-circuits. His jaw locks into rigid stone, paralyzed by the sheer humiliation of her words. Serafina straightens her posture, her desperate eyes darting toward the kitchen as she calculates how fast she can disappear. But then comes the horrifying, agonizing screech of heavy wood dragging across the floor. Corrado rises to his massive height, and the room feels like all the oxygen just burned away. She takes a panicked step backward, but his hand clamps around her fragile wrist like an iron vault. It proves a bitter lesson. When you finally choose to stand your ground, you must be prepared to face the storm. His rough thumb slowly traces the pale skin of her wrist, pressing the freezing metal of his heavy gold ring directly against her racing pulse. He leans in so dangerously close that the sharp scent of aged whiskey and dark tobacco completely surrounds her. When he finally speaks, his voice drops into a terrifyingly calm Italian that sends literal ice water through her veins. He demands she say it again, forcing her to look into the tragic darkness of his eyes. That single, breathless moment of eye contact completely shatters her defenses. Every survival instinct she possesses starts screaming in pure terror. She abandons every shred of her pride and absolutely bolts. Stick with me on this one. When your deepest intuition warns you of a predator, you drop everything and run. The kitchen door slams violently, and the thick scent of rancid grease triggers a sudden revolt in her stomach. She clamps a trembling hand over her mouth, stumbling down the narrow hallway like a tragic ghost trapped in a waking nightmare. Ripping her bag from its rusted hook, the strap tears, a tiny sacrifice to her desperate need for flight. She bursts into the black alley, where the freezing night air hits her skin like a physical blow. She runs blindly past rusted railings until her legs give out entirely. Collapsing against the damp brickwork, she cradles her stomach to shelter the fragile secret growing inside her. A lone taxi creeps from the shadows just as her vision blurs. The lesson is simple. The universe often provides an escape exactly when our own strength leaves us. You and I know this kind of desperate night. Serafina raises a trembling hand, the taxi squealing to a halt. Collapsing into the cracked leather seat, her body surrenders to the heavy gravity of panic. The camera lingers as she swallows hard, forcing her address past the lump in her throat. She presses her feverish forehead against the freezing glass, fingers curling protectively over her lower abdomen. Through the rearview mirror, the driver's eyes soften. He gently asks if she needs help. She shakes her head, desperate only for her apartment, where Miriam leaves the kitchen light burning. The lesson here is a quiet, tragic truth. Often, the first choice a person can make is simply choosing to walk through the absolute darkest storm without reaching out for a savior. The room's atmosphere shifts the moment the deadbolt clicks, echoing like a gavel. Serafina drops her torn bag, sprinting for the bathroom as her body violently rejects the terror of the night. Miriam follows her into the harsh fluorescent light, holding a mug of black coffee. The camera catches the fear in Miriam's eyes as she softly asks if a tavern patron went too far. Serafina looks up from the cold tiles, ghost pale and shivering, her hands locked defensively over her womb. The casual concern evaporates, replaced by a suffocating, tragic gravity as the silence stretches out. The life lesson here is undeniable. When a dark truth has the power to burn your world to the ground, genuine loyalty is found only in those willing to sit beside you in the smoking ashes. Watch closely as denial physically fails the body. Serafina attempts a fragile laugh, but her throat pulls shut. Miriam refuses the performance, her expression hardening into a demand for truth. Serafina squeezes her eyes shut, knowing the light means confessing her clash with the city's ruthless syndicate boss. Slipping into survival mode, she chooses blind avoidance. For 2 agonizing days, she hides behind a fake fever to dodge her shifts. But by the 3rd morning, the illusion shatters. Miriam forces her to face the facts, pushing her back toward the predatory underworld. The wisdom here is absolute. We can build elaborate, towering fortresses to hide from our deepest mistakes, but harsh reality will always find a way to eventually tear down the walls. The cold machinery of daily life offers zero mercy. Rent is looming, and a crucial doctor's visit hangs over her head. Her hand is forced by the brutal math of poverty. She slips back onto the dimly lit tavern floor, exchanging a silent look of solidarity with a co-worker. The camera pans to reveal a compromised room. The shadowed corner booth holds the syndicate elite. Corrado sits angled, watching the floor like a dark bird of prey. Beside him sit Sicilian, the enforcer, and Bran, the aging advisor whose soft whispers precede violent disappearances. Fingers trembling against her serving tray, she forces her legs to walk straight toward them. The lesson is deeply grounding. Pure fear might be paralyzing, but the relentless demands of basic survival will always force us to step right back into the flames. Notice the suffocating psychological warfare in this scene. Corrado refuses to speak her name, dismissing her in a cold, calculated display of dominance. She retreats to the shadows, surviving the hour by melting into the peeling wallpaper. But raw desperation makes humans sloppy. Faking a twisted ankle to escape his gravitational pull, she drags her right leg in an exaggerated limp. Retreating to the pitch-black hallway, she steps directly into Corrado's massive silhouette. His voice drops to a whisper, softly asking which foot is broken. Blind, deafening panic overrides all reason. She lifts her left foot, entirely forgetting her own fiction. The takeaway from this tragic error is critical. If you choose to weave a lie to survive, the tiniest lapse in memory will always become your downfall. The camera pushes in on the mechanics of this confrontation. Corrado's dark eyes lock onto her uninjured foot as a suffocating silence stretches out. Dropping his voice to a lethal register, he notes she sprinted away on that exact leg nights ago. Serafina turns to stone. He breaches her space, raising a hand only to let it drop before touching her. A masterclass in intimidation. He coldly states he requested her table. Stripped of logic by sheer terror, her chin lifts. She foolishly challenges him, declaring she does not require his permission. A pale scar near his mouth twitches, betraying a flash of dark rage before he turns his back. The lesson is universal. In moments of absolute dread, our defensive instincts often provoke the very predator we desperately want to escape. Halfway down the corridor, the syndicate boss halts. Without turning, he murmurs that he will wait for her to pour his next bottle on her own terms. It is a brilliant, terrifying illusion of choice. He exits with his men, but the steel trap snaps shut when the trembling tavern owner hands her a bone-colored card pressed with a gold mafia crest. The silent mandate is absolute. She is his property now. Days later, bathed in the cinematic sunlight and earthy scent of a bustling fruit market, the psychological pressure fractures her resolve. Fingers gripping a basket of figs, her voice breaks. She confesses to Miriam that the Don has laid claim to her. The lesson is deeply human. A dangerous secret acts as a heavy stone upon the chest, and trying to carry it entirely alone will inevitably crush your spirit into dust. The camera locks onto Miriam as she goes rigid, a bright lemon hovering frozen in her hand. The ambient noise of the bustling market completely drops out. A ringing silence takes over as she whispers, asking if this is the supreme leader of the local syndicate. Serafina nods, and Miriam's shock hardens into cold, militaristic focus. She downs the dregs of a bitter espresso and shoves her bags aside, demanding every detail. Serafina unravels the tragedy, describing the black corridor, the suspended threat of his heavy hand, and the ivory card. Miriam absorbs the creeping dread without blinking. Biting into a bruised fig With aggressive finality, she exhales sharply and declares she has 3 survival plans. The takeaway is vital. When dark forces encroach upon your life, a fiercely loyal friend becomes your single greatest line of defense. Stick with me, because this beat is where the raw beauty of human resilience shines. Miriam outlines her absurd survival strategies. Plan 1. Vanish into a remote convent. Plan 2. Forge a fraudulent marriage certificate. The final option. Feign ignorance and speak only in broken Russian. The sheer cinematic absurdity shatters the suffocating tension. Serafina leans back, releasing a genuine laugh that echoes the vibrant girl she was before the mafia consumed her world. But the camera lingers as the joy painfully dissolves. The grim truth of her situation descends once again, and her laughter evaporates into a hollow, dead silence. The profound lesson here is the fragile nature of coping. Humor serves as a brilliant temporary armor against paralyzing dread, but it can never permanently hold back the cold tide of reality. We arrive at the tragic turning point of her narrative arc. The camera tilts as Serafina rests a palm over her womb, a devastating reminder of the fragile heartbeat anchoring her to this nightmare. Miriam observes the shift, dropping the comedy. She softly notes that at 10 weeks pregnant, a cheap tavern apron will soon fail to hide the truth. Serafina offers no response, marching forward in stoic silence. But the illusion of safety shatters the moment they round the corner to her building. Idling menacingly under a broken street lamp is an armor-plated black sedan, its tinted glass pitch black. The syndicate has found her sanctuary. The overarching truth is inescapable. We can run until our lungs burn to escape the dark complications of our past. But our consequences will inevitably be waiting for us on our own front porch. Let us unpack this psychological torture together. Miriam's voice drops to a whisper, asking if they recognize the vehicle. Serafina shakes her head. The women walk past the rumbling machine in a suffocating silence. Sliding her key into the lock, Serafina casts a paranoid glance over her shoulder. The armored beast does not move. No enforcers step out. It simply sits in the fog, a silent watcher projecting absolute power. Only when the apartment lights flick on does the engine roar, sliding away into the night. Inside, Serafina presses her feverish forehead against the cold refrigerator, desperate for grounding. For her next 2 shifts, the boss's table remains empty. The psychological lesson is profound. The quiet, agonizing anticipation of violence is often far more destructive to the human soul than the actual confrontation itself. The camera treats that bone-colored card as a cursed object. It was an absolute decree of underworld law, chaining her to his table like iron shackles. For 2 nights, the boss vanished, leaving her drowning in suffocating anxiety. Then, on the 3rd evening, the phantom returns. The atmospheric pressure in the tavern plummets instantly. A coworker grazes her arm, silently confirming the nightmare. Corrado is back on his leather throne, angled perfectly to survey his kingdom. In the shadows lurks Sicilian, the enforcer. His arms hang completely loose at his sides. In the language of the syndicate, relaxed hands signify a terrifying readiness to draw a weapon in a heartbeat. It presents a stark life lesson. When the most dangerous predators in your life suddenly become unnervingly quiet and deeply relaxed, that is the exact moment you need to run. Let us examine the table together. 2 hardened faces sat deep in the shadows, amplifying the glaring absence of the old counselor. Swallowing a heavy tide of panic, she stepped forward to serve them. Corrado looked right past her, his dark eyes plunging back into the cold mechanics of his empire. Retreating to the far corner, she exhaled a fractured breath. believing she might survive the night without waking the wolves. But biology cares nothing for desperate hopes. Without warning, her body staged a violent revolt. A punishing wave of sickness crashed into her with the force of a derailed train. It brings us to a simple truth. You might successfully trick the best perceptive crime boss in the room, but your physical body will never let you lie. The raw psychology of humiliation drives her next move. When that brutal wave of nausea hits, she abandons her serving tray and bolts down the narrow corridor. Pride forces her trembling hand, as she refuses to shatter her dignity in front of dangerous strangers. But the universe has a cruel sense of irony, and she finds the heavy restroom door locked tight. Defeated, she slumps against the damp, flickering wall, closing her eyes and praying for the violent storm to pass. Yet, when her eyes flutter open, her racing heart nearly stops. Standing there, completely blocking her only avenue of escape, is the crime boss himself. It leaves us with a profound life lesson. You can sprint away from your problems until your lungs burn, but your greatest challenges will always find you waiting in the dark. Notice with me how he moves with the terrifying silence of a phantom. She never heard a single footstep, yet there is Corrado, leaning against the doorframe as if he commands the very oxygen in the hall. He watches her with the chilling stillness of an apex predator who knows the hunt is over. Instantly, her nausea evaporates, replaced by pure survival instinct. Speaking flawless Italian, he notes the irony that she masters his native tongue, yet still attempts to flee. The deep, vibrating timbre of his words forces her to press her spine against the freezing plaster. We see a powerful life lesson unfold here. Genuine fear has a strange way of overriding every other weakness, forcing us to stand tall and finally face the music instead of hiding in the shadows. The psychological warfare in this claustrophobic hallway is fascinating. She holds her fragile ground, boldly admitting that she is running. Corrado takes one slow, deliberate step forward, the flickering light catching the jagged scar on his lip. But here is the cinematic twist. He quietly insists he is not keeping her trapped. He points directly to the unlocked exit behind her shoulder, offering a clear path to safety. She stares at the heavy metal door, then looks right back into his dark eyes, and she remains entirely still. He recognizes her tragic choice immediately. This heavy moment offers a profound life lesson. Real freedom is not merely having an open door available to you. It is about whether you actually want to leave, or if you secretly crave the danger holding you in place. Corrado registers her silent surrender in a fraction of a second. His intense gaze drops to her trembling hands, and he smoothly closes the remaining distance. The gap dissolves until she can feel the physical heat radiating from his chest. He carries the heavy, intoxicating scent of pure authority and violence. Panic seizes her throat, erasing her voice before she can even question his dark motives. Then, shattering his untouchable facade, he whispers that he is about to do something foolish. A genuine, uncalculated smile breaks across his hardened face. It serves as a striking life lesson. No matter how much emotional steel you wrap around your heart, true vulnerability will always locate a crack in your armor and expose exactly what you are trying to hide. Let us pause and look closely at what happens next. That rare warmth actually reaches his exhausted eyes, but the moment he senses his own emotional exposure, he acts. Before the mask of the ruthless crime boss can slip back into place, Corrado leans down and kisses her. This is no cinematic romance. It is a desperate collision of two entirely different worlds. She finds herself pinned between the freezing plaster and his radiating heat. overwhelmed by the taste of aged whiskey. When he pulls away, she is left breathless. He steps back into the shadows, leaving her completely stunned. Life teaches us a beautiful lesson right here. A single second of raw, unfiltered honesty possesses the power to completely shatter years of carefully constructed walls and endless pretending. Following that jarring embrace, Corrado is breathless. His knuckles turn bone white as he wrestles with the instinct to pull her back into the shadows, stripped of his command. His voice is a rough whisper when he promises to wait until she stops running. We are no longer looking at a feared syndicate leader. We are witnessing a fractured man pleading for grace. He vanishes into the deafening noise of the club. Left alone, she remains paralyzed against the wall for 2 agonizing minutes, her trembling fingers gripping her apron like a lifeline. It proves a fundamental life lesson. The undeniable truth of our deepest desires always lives within the physical body, even when the brain works frantically to deny it. By sunrise, she knows the illusion of safety is finally over. The cold dawn brings absolutely no mercy. Miriam is waiting in the kitchen, armed with a pitcher of juice she claims is a cure. Sarafina simply collapses at the worn wooden table, burying her pale face as morning sickness delivers brutal waves of nausea. Watching her carefully over a steaming mug of black coffee, Miriam abandons the gentle roommate routine to adopt the role of a ruthless interrogator. She plainly states that the physical illness is escalating. When Sarafina attempts a weak denial, her friend effortlessly cuts through the deception. This exchange highlights an essential life lesson. True friends serve as the unforgiving mirrors where we cannot hide our messy reality. The heaviest, most fiercely guarded secrets we swallow will always eventually bleed out into the light. Miriam strikes the table hard with her mug, crossing her arms to deliver a piercing glare that mixes genuine fear with absolute exhaustion. She suffocates Sarafina's pathetic excuses before they can even form. With surgical precision, Miriam dissects the absurdity of their existence. Her friend is pouring drinks for the Sicilian syndicate, actively hunted by their lethal kingpin, all while secretly carrying a child from an aimless phantom who vanished months ago. Even the cash keeping a roof over their heads drips directly from the criminal underworld. It forces us to confront a punishing life lesson. Your unresolved past mistakes will always return to collect their heavy debts in the present, and they will consistently demand the ultimate price of your own inner peace. You and I have to appreciate Miriam's absolute refusal to soften the blow. She demands to know how long this fragile house of cards can possibly stand. Sarafina shrinks backward, terrified by her friend, dropping heavy reality checks like anvils. She weakly offers to just keep pouring drinks, but they both know the hourglass is empty. Then, Miriam strikes the fatal nerve, openly questioning that shadow kiss with Corrado. Defeated, Sarafina drops her burning forehead against the chilled wood of the table. She is harboring a child from a coward while being pursued by a terrifying monarch of crime. It illustrates a harsh life lesson. Running away from your ordinary problems usually just drops you straight into the open jaws of much larger, far more devastating monsters. Showing zero mercy, Miriam dryly notes that a strict convent would at least guarantee them 3 square meals a day. That razor-sharp wit pulls a weak laugh from Sarafina, whose face remains pressed against the cold table. It reveals a quiet life lesson. We all desperately need these tiny pockets of shared humanity to grant us permission to breathe when our world is burning down. But safety is always temporary. By the next evening, Sarafina is thrust right back into the suffocating lion den. Corrado occupies his usual hidden booth, isolated behind his menacing enforcer. He sits silently glaring at his phone. His expensive drink is entirely ignored as he bears the crushing gravity of the entire underworld across his broad shoulders. You and I are going to unpack this together, starting with the choreography of avoidance. Sarafina spends her shift navigating the bar like a ghost, desperately ignoring the syndicate at the back table. But fate is rarely deterred by the boundaries we draw. When her coworker reveals that Corrado has summoned her to his private office, his absence leaves behind a suffocating dread. She draws a fractured breath before stepping toward the lion den. Crossing that worn floor is akin to marching straight toward the gallows. Yet, the lesson here is quiet but profound. Sometimes, forcing yourself to take a single step into absolute terror is the truest manifestation of human courage. Behind her, the hitman Sicilian steps into her shadow, tethering her to a darkness she can no longer ignore. Before the heavy oak door opens, Sicilian does something entirely unexpected for a hardened enforcer. He leans in close, the scent of leather clinging to his jacket, and offers a quiet, startling vow. If Corrado frightens her, she only needs to scream, and he will tear the door down. It is a stunning betrayal of the expected order, a loyal soldier shielding a fragile girl from his own master. She searches his scarred face and finds absolute, terrifying sincerity. True loyalty, we learn in these dark moments, is never about blind obedience to the hand that feeds you. It is the raw, moral courage to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. Leaving the sentry behind, she steps into an office thick with the scent of bitter espresso, dust, and long-buried regrets. The lighting shifts, framing Corrado against a towering bookshelf. His suit jacket is discarded, sleeves rolled just enough for a gold ring to catch the amber glow. Softly, he asks her to close the door. She presses the heavy wood shut, resting her trembling forehead against it, mining the depths of her soul for a single shred of courage. Folding her arms into a tight shield, she demands to know why she is here. Corrado turns, offering a steaming cup of coffee, his voice smooth as glass as he claims he only has questions. She rejects the peace offering instantly. Earning genuine trust always demands one essential, universal first step. We must fully respect the defensive boundaries of a wounded soul. Corrado merely nods, silently honoring the invisible wall she has built between them. Corrado sinks into a dark leather armchair, radiating a terrifying, coiled stillness. He motions toward the seat directly across from him, but Sarafina refuses the predator and prey dynamic. She claims the edge of a worn sofa instead, sitting angled toward the door, clinging to the desperate illusion that she can escape at any second. A heavy brass lamp throws long, suffocating shadows across the room. Slowly, his probing begins. He asks about her bloodline. It is a deeply tragic human defense mechanism. We spend our lives building elaborate, towering walls of fiction just to protect the shattered fragments of our real selves. Her coffee turns bitter and cold as she spins a hollow lie about a distant mother down in Katana, praying her true ghosts remain safely buried in the dark. She grips her cup, pushing forward with her fragile fiction. She claims she moved to Rome for nursing school, eyes cast downward. Corrado absorbs this precisely, slowly swirling his drink, mentally cataloging the cracks in her voice. Then comes the surgical strike. Why would a student pour cheap liquor in a mob bar? What changed? Sarafina whispers that everything changed, her tone dripping with trauma. Hitting absolute rock bottom fundamentally rewires the core architecture of the human spirit. The interrogation abruptly ends. Corrado sets his glass down. He stands, driving the tension to an unbearable peak, and offers his bare hand. As her shaking fingers meet his palm, he pulls her up with breathtaking, unspoken gentleness. Stick with me here, because we need to feel the suffocating gravity of this scene. She stands so close to the Don that the heat of his chest bleeds through her blouse. He rests one hand on her waist, waiting with the agonizing patience of a hunter. Caught in his dark pull, she tips backward against the sofa. His fingers drift upward, tracing her ribs with a slowness that forces her eyelids shut. He dips his face close, a phantom brush of breath grazing her jaw. She braces her palms against his solid chest, just to keep her trembling legs from giving out. When relentless pressure is applied, the physical body will always surrender long before the rational mind catches up. His hand slips down the rough denim of her jeans, pulling a soft, completely involuntary gasp into the quiet room. The sharp creak of the leather sofa shatters the trance, bringing harsh reality crashing back. The thick fabric of her apron presses hard against his hip, masking her most dangerous secret. She is carrying a child. The hidden swell of her belly, trapped between their bodies, sends a shockwave of panic through her nervous system. Cold sweat slicks her palms. Her voice splinters as she whispers that she cannot do this today. Corrado freezes instantly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Desperate, she weaves a frantic lie about her monthly cycle, the false words burning her throat like acid. She is a terrible liar, and he is a lethal man to cross. A lie built entirely upon a foundation of pure fear will inevitably collapse, violently burying the desperate soul who dared to tell it. Corrado studies her pale face for a fraction of a second too long. We see it clearly in his unblinking gaze. He looks straight through the fragile architecture of her deception. Yet, in a masterful display of terrifying restraint, he chooses not to tear it down. His hands slip from her waist. He takes one slow, calculated step backward, adjusts his crisp cuff, and softly murmurs that they will try another day. But the oxygen in the room has turned to ash. His jaw locks into stone, and the hunger in his eyes morphs into a heavy, suffocating darkness. Serafina flees the office, her heart thrashing like a trapped bird. We must remember a cruel truth about trauma. Simply escaping an immediate physical threat is never the same thing as surviving the invisible danger that follows you home. You and I are going to look at this together. As she stumbles into the hallway, the usual guard is gone. In his place stands Ettore, the aging consigliere. His sharp suit conceals decades of Palermo bloodshed. He does not move a muscle, projecting a terrifying void of human emotion. He merely tracks her panic-stricken face with the methodical patience of an old wolf analyzing a wounded deer. Serafina feels the icy weight of his stare burning into her spine as she rounds the corner. She has no idea that before dawn breaks, this quiet man will tell the Don she is hiding something massive. It is a chilling, undeniable truth. The most destructive forces we face are rarely the loudest voices in the room. They are the silent, patient figures watching us from the darkest corners. While she retreats to her cramped apartment, clutching her stomach and battling violent morning sickness, the camera pulls back, shifting our focus. The true sequence of that night only emerges later. Hours after her escape, the veteran Ettore arrives uninvited at the sprawling Malacan villa. This stone fortress is buried deep within the Via Appia Antica, swallowed by ancient, twisted pines that hide its iron gates from the waking world. The brutal architecture serves as a profound, cinematic metaphor for the syndicate. We must remember this sobering lesson about absolute power. The most magnificent, heavily fortified walls in our world are rarely constructed to keep danger out. They are designed specifically to keep the ugliest, darkest secrets locked permanently inside. The visual scale of this estate is intensely cinematic. It is a cold stone mansion with towering windows gazing down upon forbidden grounds. Since inheriting his empire, Corrado has roamed these echoing halls like a trapped ghost. Ettore locates the Don in his mahogany study. Corrado stares blankly into the middle distance, still wearing his wrinkled shirt from the night before, exhaustion radiating from his heavy frame. Without asking, Ettore takes a seat, a quiet display of dominance earned through 60 years of ruthless service. He immediately brings up the terrified waitress. This tense exchange reveals a critical insight. Genuine loyalty does not flatter the ego with sweet, comfortable lies. True loyalty delivers the heavy, brutal truths required to survive in a dangerous world. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Ettore drops a quiet bombshell that shatters the dead air of the study. He reveals the fragile waitress hears everything in the bar, and worse, someone is secretly paying her for the intel. Corrado does not blink. He remains carved from stone, his cold eyes locked on the trees outside, fingers lightly gripping a forgotten cup of coffee. Then Ettore names the rat, Teresi. It is the exact same man who makes her stomach turn violently every single morning. The old mobster explains that Teresi has covered her rent 4 times, buying her whispered secrets. We have to remember one harsh truth. Sheer, blinding desperation will force even the most innocent soul to dance with the devil just to keep a fragile roof over their head. Teresi is a disgraced former lieutenant, cast out of the syndicate for stealing. Now, he survives entirely on cheap street scams and her paralyzing terror. She despises every dirty coin he forces upon her. The cash never covers the full rent, and it is always late. She forces her exhausted, pregnant body through grueling double shifts just to afford doctors and the secret stack of diapers hidden deep in her closet. She feels entirely alone, trapped by a monster who could snap her fragile life in half. But miles away in that shadowed study, Corrado absorbs every single word. It is a powerful reminder of how the world works. We often carry the crushing weight of our deepest fears, completely unaware that someone out there is already quietly sharpening a blade to set us free. The room goes dead quiet when Ettore stops talking. Corrado stares ahead, the desk lamp casting brutal shadows across his jaw. When he speaks, his voice is terrifyingly hollow, asking exactly how long the girl has been an informant. Months, the old man whispers. Corrado orders the veteran mobster to stand down, insisting he will handle this mess himself. Ettore swallows hard, adjusts his heavy scarf, and slips out. Days later, beneath a bruised autumn sky, Corrado's armored car idles by the Tiber River. He watches through tinted glass as his enforcer, Sicilian, meets a paranoid Teresi by a rusted bridge, handing over a plain brown envelope. We have to remember this simple truth. The most devastating acts of revenge always begin with a quiet, calculated whisper. Let us look at this tragic trap together. Teresi rips open that brown envelope, and under the flickering street lamp, the blood physically drains from his face. His trembling hands cram the thick stack of papers deep into his winter coat. Sicilian does not say a single word. The enforcer just turns his back and walks to the idling car. Miles away in a dim bar, Serafina is wiping down tables, blind to the snare closing around her. Corrado has fed Teresi altered dates and phantom money, letting the blackmailer believe he still holds power. Serafina works until her hands ache, oblivious that the boss now holds her leash in the dark. It is a painful rule of the world. Life loves to make you feel completely free, right before the heavy steel door locks shut behind you. The air in the bar turns heavy the second Corrado walks through the door. Outside, the autumn heat is suffocating, but he glides in completely unbothered in a tailored jacket. This quiet calm hides the violent boss breathing underneath. He sits in the dim corner ordering his usual whiskey. Serafina grips the bottle, her hand shaking as she pours. Corrado reaches out, his rough knuckles deliberately brushing against her pale skin. He lets the contact linger for a breathless second before taking the glass. Then his dark eyes soften. He softly asks if she has eaten anything today. Stunned, she stammers a weak excuse about eating later. It is a quiet reminder for all of us. Real affection does not arrive with loud parades, but with someone simply making sure you survive the day. He leans into the low light, refusing to let the subject drop. When she mumbles about leftovers, he cuts her off. Frightened, she goes on the defensive, using his formal title to build a wall between them. Corrado simply offers a razor-thin smirk. His voice drops to a low rumble, reminding her that since they kissed in the hallway, she has earned the right to use his first name. A hot flush creeps up her neck, and she falls silent. Corrado watches her panic, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. The horrifying truth is that he already holds all her darkest secrets. He is playing the caring lover just to keep his trap tight, ensuring she feeds Teresi lies. It is a warning we all eventually learn. Sometimes the absolute sweetest affection is just the honey hiding a deadly razor blade. Serafina does not see the storm gathering. The bloody reality will not hit her until later, when Teresi's broken body is found on the freezing concrete of an empty lot. Halfway through her shift, the doors groan open. Sicilian steps signs-eyed, his massive shadow swallowing the glow of the bar. She nervously scrubs a glass while the enforcer stands there like a granite statue. Terrified by the crushing silence, she awkwardly offers him a drink. Sicilian's cold eyes do not even blink. He states in a deadpan voice that he works directly for her boyfriend, making alcohol forbidden. That single word strikes her chest like a heavy steel hammer. It is a tragic fact of human nature. We rarely ever hear the snow breaking until the avalanche is already rushing down to bury us alive. You and I have likely survived moments where the floor drops out from under us. Serafina stands frozen, her wide eyes staring as her panicked brain tries to reboot. She opens her mouth to deny the violent boss is her man, but the words turn to ash in her dry throat. Sicilian watches her struggle, a cruel smirk tugging at his mouth. He simply turns his broad back and walks away, leaving emotional devastation in his wake. Serafina remains paralyzed behind the scratched oak counter, her cheeks burning with intense heat. Nearby, her co-worker Juicy bites her lip, trembling as she tries not to laugh. Serafina furiously snaps at her to shut up, though Juicy never made a sound. We must remember that the quietest, unspoken moments are usually the ones screaming the absolute loudest warnings. In his dark corner booth, Corrado whispers violent business to two hitters. Sicilian drifts from the shadows, sliding a heavy envelope across the wood. The boss barely glances down as he signs it. For 3 agonizing hours, Corrado's whiskey sits untouched. Serafina watches his rigid posture, knowing this restraint is unnatural. You learn to measure a man's demons by how desperately he tries to drown them. When the bar goes dark, Serafina drags her exhausted bones into the damp alley. Instantly, her breath catches. A sleek black sedan idles in the gloom. Sicilian sits in the driver's seat. The rear door slowly swings open, revealing Corrado waiting in the pitch black. It is a haunting truth of the human heart. We can clearly see the steel teeth of a deadly trap, yet we step right into it anyway. Corrado's low voice echoes from the dark interior, telling her to get in. He offers a ride, but Sarafina grips her coat, trying to stay independent. She stammers that she can call a cab. Corrado delivers an ice-cold fact. He murmurs that she could, but she will not. It is not a threat, just terrifying certainty. It shakes the soul when someone knows your next move before you do. She glances at Sicilian, perched like a stone gargoyle, and her resistance crumbles. She slides onto the freezing leather, wrapped in the scent of dark coffee and expensive cologne. The maddening part is that Corrado completely ignores her. He stares out at the blurred city lights, his jaw pulled tight. We often forget this painful lesson. Absolute silence is always much heavier to carry than a screaming match. The black sedan glides through the streets like a ghost. Sarafina presses against the glass, paralyzed by the suffocating gravity of Corrado sitting inches away. At her apartment, the boss shatters the agonizing silence. In a soft voice, he wishes her a good night, reminding her to eat before sleeping. The sheer tenderness shakes her to the bone. She stammers a breathless reply, yanking the heavy door handle. She spills onto the pavement, sprinting to the entrance without looking back. Heart-hammering, she scrambles up 3 flights of stairs. Inside, the flat is pitch black. Her roommate Miriam is dead to the world in a deep sleep. It is a harsh reality we all face. True terror does not strike in the chaos, but waits to consume us when we are finally alone in the dark. Come with me. This is where the nightmare begins. Sarafina flicks on her tiny lamp, casting a frail glow. She creeps to the window and peeks down. Her blood turns to ice. That black car is still parked in the shadows. The engine is softly purring, headlights dead. The boss is waiting below just to watch her bedroom light turn on, a chilling echo of his surveillance. She hides behind the curtains, staring down for 20 agonizing seconds. Even through the dark glass, she feels his silhouette staring right back up at her. Finally, the car melts into the night. She yanks the curtains shut, trembling as she unties her apron. A sickening realization punches the air from her lungs. We all must face this chilling truth. True love and toxic control often wear the exact same comforting mask. The fabric of Sarafina's apron pulls taut against her waist, a physical reminder of the heavy secret she carries. Today, you and I will explore how biology refuses to stay quiet in a world built entirely on silence. She leans against the freezing brick wall, exhaustion radiating deep in her bones. Midnight is the brutal hour when adrenaline fades and the hardest truths settle in. In a few short weeks, no oversized sweater will hide the new life growing inside her. She desperately needs to escape this violent underground before the syndicate spots her vulnerability. But here is the deeply tragic lesson of this dark world. We usually only look for the emergency exit long after the final steel door has locked shut from the outside. Welcome to Chapter 5, where the flying bullet finally meets the cold truth. The club vibrates with heavy bass tonight, packed with dangerous men and whispered deals. Sarafina feels a terrifying burnout with every step through the thick haze. This is not just the ache of a double shift. It is a profound weight pulling at her core, forcing her to silently gasp for air between serving rounds. Her body is hijacking her survival instincts, reminding us that the most brutal sacrifices always begin in absolute silence. Across the room, Juicy manages the front tables with cold authority. She glides through the chaos like a ghost, wearing the hardened expression of a woman who has carried her own invisible burdens for decades. It reveals a deeply unfair truth. The women trapped in this syndicate, quietly bear the crushing weight of the world, never once daring to ask for a hand to help them. Let us look at this opening scene together, shall we? The camera pans across a dimly lit club. Sarafina moves through her usual section, wiping down sticky tables, but the rhythm is entirely wrong. The heavy presence of the crime family is missing. Corrado is a ghost tonight. When she asks about his men, a bartender brushes it off with a weak lie about business in Ostia. She accepts it, brushing away the nagging doubt. Then, right at midnight, the owner barks at her to fetch liquor from the underground garage. The lens pushes close as she freezes. A damp rag hangs motionless in her trembling hand. A sudden, violent chill grips her spine, sinking deep into her bones. Here is a simple truth we all learn eventually. When your gut screams that a quiet room is dangerous, you must always listen to the silence. The camera follows her downward, leaving the warm neon lights behind for a freezing concrete tomb. Sarafina takes the steep ramp, her footsteps echoing like a slow, dreadful heartbeat. Above her, a single shattered bulb flickers, casting long, bruised shadows against the sweating walls. The air down here is heavy, choking her with the sharp scent of motor oil and coal dust. Notice the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she wraps her arms around herself. The utter isolation is suffocating, peeling away all the safety she thought she had upstairs. It is a brilliant, terrifying picture of impending doom. It reminds us of a hard life lesson. The environments we fear the most are often just dark mirrors, reflecting the terrible things we have spent our whole lives trying to run away from. She creeps forward, her fingers white-knuckled around the rusted stair rail, treating it like a lifeline. The heavy steel door to the storage room waits just ahead, bathed in weak grey light. But as she reaches out, a shadow peels itself away from the concrete pillar. Teresi steps into the frame. The camera catches the absolute ruin of his face. Sunken, bloodshot eyes hide behind deep purple bruises of insomnia and drug abuse. His shoulders twitch with the erratic, terrifying energy of a man completely unmoored from reality. He is the ghost of a bad decision, heavily armed and deeply broken. It is a tragic sight, watching a soul consumed entirely by the underworld. Remember this simple lesson as you watch him. A person who has already lost everything is the most dangerous obstacle you will ever cross. The scene erupts into violent motion without a single warning. Teresi lunges, propelled by years of festering rage, moving with a jagged, predatory speed. Before Sarafina can even take a breath, he violently throws her against a rough stone pillar. The camera shakes as his calloused hand locks entirely around her throat. Her skull cracks against the concrete, sending a sudden burst of white static across the screen. We see the sheer terror widening her eyes. He digs his thumb precisely into her windpipe, applying a calculated, agonizing pressure meant to torture, not kill. The sound design drops everything but her ragged, desperate gasps. It brings us to a very painful realization about the world. Violence never knocks on your door to announce itself. It simply kicks it down and shatters your life. I want you to really focus on the intimate horror of this close-up. Teresi leans in so closely that she can feel the heat of his foul, tobacco-stained breath. His grip is a cage of psychological dominance. He spits wild accusations, completely convinced she and Corrado played him for a fool. Sarafina desperately tries to speak, to beg, but only a wet, broken wheeze escapes her lips. His eyes are empty, totally dead to her suffering, lost in a twisted fantasy of revenge. The lighting turns harsh, isolating them in a bubble of pure brutality. As her vision slowly begins to narrow into a terrifying dark tunnel, We see her hands weakly clawing at his iron grip. It leaves us with a stark life lesson. When anger completely blinds a man to his own humanity, the truth becomes the very first victim to bleed out, hovering on the absolute edge of a blackout. The jagged, furious lines of his face come into razor-sharp focus. He snarls the word traitor, and, in that split second, a horrific epiphany crashes over Serafina. The camera pushes in on her tear-filled eyes as the pieces finally connect. Curado knew everything. Those gentle, shadowed kisses, the soft promises in the late hours, they were entirely manufactured. The crime boss simply used her warm body as bait to lure this broken animal out of hiding. The absolute devastation on her face is harder to watch than the physical violence. She was never a lover, only a pawn sacrificed on a cold chessboard. Take this simple truth to heart. The most devastating betrayals never come from our enemies. They always come from the hands we completely trusted to hold us safe. As her knees begin to buckle under his crushing grip, a primal, maternal instinct suddenly violently awakens. The fragile, unborn life inside her becomes her only anchor to the world. She reaches a shaking hand down toward her stomach, ready to endure anything to protect her child. But right before her fingertips brush her dress, a single, deafening gunshot shatters the heavy air. The sound cracks like a whip, offering absolutely no echo. In a cinematic heartbeat, the entire power dynamic of the room flips on its head. The tension snaps. It is a masterfully executed pivot, leaving the audience breathless. It teaches us a haunting, complex lesson about survival. Sometimes the very force that violently rips you from the jaws of death is the exact same monster that plans to swallow you whole tomorrow. Let us step back and look at the terrifying composition of this frame. Teresi instantly releases her throat. His face goes completely slack. He drops like a puppet with cut strings, bouncing off a rusted bumper before hitting the floor. And there, standing in the shadows, is Kura. Oh, his designer suit is immaculate, his posture perfectly relaxed, the smoking gun steady in his hand. Beside him, the Sicilian emerges from the dark, carrying the detached calm of an undertaker. Curado weaponized his enemy's predictable rage, scripting this execution down to the very last second. It is a stunning display of absolute control. The lesson here is as cold as the concrete. In a world driven by loud, chaotic anger, the quietest, most calculating man in the room will always walk away the victor. She hits the greasy floor hard, coughing violently as air rushes back into her bruised lungs. But the paralyzing fear is gone, instantly replaced by a blinding, white-hot fury. She tastes raw copper on her tongue, staring up at the man who just saved her life with absolute, unfiltered disgust. Sicilian steps forward and hauls her up by the arm with the mechanical precision of a machine. Meanwhile, Curado simply holsters his weapon and gently wipes a microscopic drop of blood from his crisp white cuff. He does not even look at her as he softly orders her into the car. It is a moment of profound, sickening realization for her. Here is a bitter truth we must all face about power. The hero who heroically pulls you from the burning fire is often the exact same architect who locked you inside and struck the match. Her body violently trembles, every instinct in screaming to run into the city night. But with dark bruises blooming around her throat and an innocent child to protect, escape is a tragic illusion. She numbly climbs into their armored vehicle. The heavy door shuts with a vault-like click, sealing her inside. As the first desperate wash of streetlights flickers across her face, the fragile dam breaks. She erupts into raw, tear-jerking screams, her voice cracking as she hurls her broken heart at him. She accuses him of using her life as cheap bait. We learn a devastating lesson watching her fall apart. Never mistake a predator's meticulous grooming for genuine affection. To the spider, the beautiful web is never a home. It is simply a tool designed to catch its next necessary meal. You and I should pause here, because the emotional destruction in this tight space is overwhelming. She throws her absolute agony at him, calling him a monster, no better than the thugs in the alley. The betrayal cuts so deeply. He invaded her safest spaces, whispered to her in the dark, and pretended to cherish her, all while calculating a brutal murder using her as the lure. She screams until her vocal cords tear, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence trapped in the vehicle. Beside her, Corrado sits perfectly still, a beautiful, terrifying statue of indifference. He simply stares out the tinted window. It is a haunting image that underscores a very harsh reality. When someone has completely destroyed your trust, their cold silence is often far more violent than the loudest, most vicious lie they could ever tell. He offers zero defense. There are no smooth excuses, no romantic apologies whispered to calm her down. When she finally slumps against the freezing leather seat, entirely empty and gasping for air, he slowly turns his head. The charming, polished mask completely melts away, revealing the apex predator underneath. His voice drops into a dark, gravelly whisper as he calmly asks exactly how many weeks along she is. The temperature in the car drops to absolute zero. She stares at him, paralyzed by the sheer terror of his calm. He knew about the baby. He knew the entire time. It brings us to a terrifying, necessary life lesson. Sometimes, the precious secrets we desperately hide to protect ourselves are the exact same weapons our enemies have already quietly sharpened to keep us completely under their control. Let's watch this unfold. For weeks, Curado observed her from the shadows, easily seeing past the oversized aprons and the trembling exhaustion in her wrists, balancing those heavy diner trays. When she realized her lies were useless, the fight drained from her body. Her shoulders slumped into a hollow collapse. Through jagged breaths, the broken girl unspooled her tragedy. She spoke of her late partner, a gentle soul snatched away by a car crash just weeks ago. His car had violently flipped on a bone-dry road under a clear sky. It stands as a chilling reminder for you and me. When a catastrophic tragedy strikes with impossibly perfect timing, it is rarely fate. There is almost always a human hand meticulously pulling the strings in the dark. The weight of her history hangs thick in the room. She whispers about the agonizing late-night hospital call, arriving to find the man she loved already cold. Days after his burial, she discovered a new life growing inside her. Picture her curled on the freezing tile, clutching a pregnancy test like a life raft in a lightless ocean. Abandoned by her mother, she hid one pack of diapers in a closet just to prove this child was real. Across the table, Corrado remains carved from ice. He does not shift his weight. He offers no words of pity. He simply absorbs her weeping without a blink. It brings us to a quiet truth about human nature. Real power lives in the dead space. The people who listen with terrifying stillness are often the ones plotting the most devastating moves. Curado smooths a crease from his tailored sleeve, seamlessly stepping back into the skin of a boss. His dark eyes lock onto hers to deliver an ironclad decree. She and the unborn child belong to him now, and no breathing soul will ever harm them. The girl sits frozen, suffocated by the gravity of his promise. Is this salvation, or is she now locked inside a gilded cage? A dizzying wave of relief and primal terror washes over her. As his car glides into the night, amber streetlights slash across his emotionless profile. We must remember a harsh reality about life's debts. The line dividing a savior offering rescue and a warden locking the iron door is dangerously thin. Sudden salvation in a vicious world always carries a devastating, hidden price. They arrive at a sprawling, fortress-like estate. As heavy iron gates open, the family's true power waits atop the stone steps. Adelaide, the matriarch, with stark white hair, she holds the presence of a ruthless general. Curado steps out, perfectly composed, helping the exhausted girl from the car. The mansion's sheer scale leaves her breathless, but Adelaide remains unmoved. Her predatory gaze snaps from Curado to the bruised girl, dropping to her concealed stomach. In a heartbeat, the matriarch uncovers the hidden pregnancy without a single syllable spoken. It leaves us with a chilling lesson. We can never conceal our deepest secrets from those who survive the darkest shadows. Before the tension shatters, Curado diffuses the moment. He issues a frigid command to his mother and guides the young woman inside. Adelaide offers no argument. She remains frozen in place like a monument of carved stone. Yet, the chilling calculation on her face is permanently seared into the young mother's memory. It is a violent wake-up call. The man who just swore to protect her was raised by a creature utterly devoid of human mercy. They walk deep into the cavernous mansion, passing dark family portraits, until arriving at a heavy wooden door that opens into a warm, inviting room. This provides a profound warning for our own lives. No matter how comforting a sanctuary appears, never ignore the blood-stained roots providing its foundation. He leaves her in a luxurious room carrying the faint scent of dried lavender and old wealth. Curado refuses to cross the threshold. He leans against the doorframe, suddenly looking as hollowed out as she feels. Instructing her to rest, he repeats his vow of safety before quietly shutting the door. Sleep is impossible. She perches on the edge of the pristine mattress, street dirt still clinging to her shoes, hands resting protectively over her child. Her mind is a violent storm. He rescued her, yes, but he also orchestrated the danger, using her as living bait to eliminate a rival without hesitation. It forces us to confront an unsettling truth about trust. Sometimes, the very person extending a hand to pull you from the flames is the exact same individual who originally struck the match. You and I know the agonizing paradox of feeling deep gratitude toward the very person you despise. Relief and fury bleed together for Serafina as she collapses into the heavy pillows. The ancient mansion seems to breathe with her, settling its bones against the cold draft. Her bruised throat throbs. In the quiet, a harsh reminder of the violent hands that nearly ended her life. Beneath that pain lies a paralyzing terror. Her trembling fingers trace her stomach, realizing her unborn child cannot stay hidden in these shadows forever. Life teaches us this simple truth. Ignoring our deepest trauma never makes it disappear. Sooner or later, we must firmly stand our ground and face the heavy realities we try so desperately to outrun. In the suffocating silence, she whispers a fierce vow to her unborn child, promising they will survive this nightmare. Exhaustion finally pulls her under until bright morning sun floods the bedroom. Venturing downstairs, her fingers slowly trace the antique railing, worn smooth by generations of violent men. Inside the quiet kitchen, a lavish spread awaits, warm bread and sweet figs. A housekeeper murmurs that the matriarch is at church, and the boss is pacing in the gardens. Driven by raw maternal instinct, she devours the food without hesitation. It is a beautiful reminder for us all. The sheer panic of yesterday will never nourish the battles you must fight today. True resilience means gathering whatever strength you have left and stepping boldly back into the morning light. She leans against the marble counter, trying to pretend her world is not shattered. Without a sound, Curado appears in the doorway. His suit jacket is gone, replaced by a white shirt with rolled sleeves. Deep circles shadow his eyes, proving he spent the night awake. His jaw tightens as he offers a fractured smile, gesturing for her to follow. He leads her into a hidden lemon grove, planted by his grandma decades ago. This quiet sanctuary stands in stark contrast to the brutal bloodshed of his empire. It brings up a powerful lesson we should all remember. No matter how ruthless your environment becomes, finding true peace is rarely about escaping reality. It is simply locating that one sacred, untouched corner where you can finally catch your breath. The sharp scent of citrus is a shocking contrast to the metallic stench of blood in the garage. Under the warm sun, her defensive walls finally crumble. Golden light pierces the canopy, making this grove feel far removed from Rome and its brutal wars. They sit on an ancient stone bench, occupying opposite ends. The physical space between them screams with tension, too distant for comfort, yet dangerously close. Curado shatters the silence with a devastating confession. He knew she understood their private Sicilian dialect from the very first day. Her subtle glances had betrayed her all along. This offers a striking lesson about human nature. No matter how flawlessly we forge our armor to hide our deepest secrets, the truth will always eventually bleed out through our eyes. Let us examine the anatomy of a betrayal. Curado pulls back the curtain, admitting he knew his lieutenant, Teresi, was compromised from the start. He lays out his trap with a chilling lack of apology. Teresi was an infection, and Curado simply supplied the rope for the man to hang himself. All those terrified nights Sarafina spent gathering forged documents. Just a calculated performance. When Teresi tried to fence that fake intel, he realized too late he was outplayed by his own pawn. The psychology here is devastating, yet you and I see this all the time. Arrogant people meticulously build the very traps that destroy them, completely blind to the fact that they are the ones holding the match. It is a vital reminder. Never let your own blind ego dig your grave. Teresi was crushed to realize he was merely a disposable piece on Curado's chessboard. Sarafina, understanding her role in this violent theater, asks the boss a haunting question. Did he send her into that garage as bait? Curado does not flinch. His face is carved from stone as he admits he needed her vulnerable to force his enemy's hand. It is a profound betrayal, yet when she asks when this dark game stopped being strictly business, the ruthless Don is struck entirely silent. His emotional armor suddenly becomes a suffocating prison. Here is a terrifying reality we must all face. The high walls you build to survive the darkness often become the exact things keeping you trapped inside it. Never let your deepest defense mechanisms destroy your only chance at a real connection. The lens focuses on the heavy quiet of the courtyard. Curado stands beneath a lemon tree, a leaf tearing slowly between his scarred fingers. The fading light catches the exhaustion in his posture as he confesses he wishes his bloody empire remained walled off from his heart. But he has no idea when he stopped tracking her as a liability and started watching her as a man completely captivated. Sarafina barely breathes the question, asking when he uncovered her secret. Curado admits he has known about the child she carries for weeks, noticing the protective way her arm rested against her stomach. You and I can find a profound lesson here. Paying absolute, undivided attention to another person is the purest act of love, even if that focus was forged by a lifetime of paranoia. The scene deepens as Curado strips away the last of her defenses. He tells her the truth about the day she froze in his study. She was not shrinking back from the fear of his violence. She was paralyzed by the terror that he would sense the fragile life growing inside her. In this breathtaking moment, his lethal intuition transforms into the safest harbor she has known. Watch how the emotional tide turns. Sarafina looks at her trembling fingers, then at his bruised knuckles. The blinding anger she carried for so long dissolves into an aching sorrow. When she asks what they do next, the boss looks her dead in the eye and says she is free to walk out the gates. It reveals a striking truth. True freedom is not just finding an open door, but having the architect of your cage hand you the keys. The camera pulls close, revealing the crushing weight of his violent throne. The predator has vanished, leaving only a profoundly exhausted man. He warns her with grim honesty that stepping outside his gates alone would be a death sentence while the rival syndicate is hunting. Sarafina knows this mansion is a gilded cage, but the world outside is a theater of war, so she makes the heavy choice to stay. As the shadows stretch across the grass, they sit on a weathered stone bench. The armor finally falls. He shares the haunting memory of finding his murdered father, and she counters that darkness with gentle memories of her grandmother. This teaches us something vital. Exposing the open wounds of your deepest trauma to someone else is often the only way the healing can begin. She speaks softly, sharing wisdom that a cruel word severs a bond faster than any hidden blade. The frame captures these fractured souls sitting shoulder to shoulder, trading the tragic blueprints of their lives. With every quiet word, the heavy armor of their pasts falls away, and then, bathed in the fading light, he kisses her. There is no frantic rush. It is a slow, deliberate movement, carrying a startling gentleness that contradicts every brutal rumor attached to his name. His calloused hands cradle her face, cementing an irreversible pact. They ascend the stone staircase together, fully awake to the gravity of this moment. The meaning here is impossible to miss. Genuine intimacy is never just physical. It is the terrifying act of trusting someone enough to stand before them entirely unarmed. He pushes open the heavy door and stops, offering a searching look that silently asks for her absolute consent. She answers with a steady nod, and the door clicks shut. He leans down to kiss her forehead with the reverence of a man entering a sanctuary. When his scarred hands drift to her waist, the delicacy of his touch is heartbreaking. He is so carefully aware of the fragile life within her, an unspoken devotion that brings tears to her eyes. Shifting into his native dialect, he whispers that she is too beautiful for this brutal earth. She manages a soft joke, and a genuine laugh rumbles in his chest, cracking his ruthless mask. It reminds us of a simple reality. True strength is not the violence you unleash on the streets, but the profound tenderness you offer behind locked doors. Appreciate the gravity of this cinematic frame. When his rough hand discovers the curve of her stomach, he stops completely. He traces her skin with a reverence that steals her breath. This is not a man driven by lust, but one consumed by unfiltered worship. His quiet awe is almost more intimidating than his notorious temper. He breaks the silence with a single word: ours. He does not whisper it like a fragile hope. He declares it like a fundamental law of physics, a decree the entire world will now be forced to obey. He carries her to the bed with staggering care. It illuminates a deeply comforting truth you and I can hold on to. Family is never just about matching bloodlines. It is about the people who step into the chaos and fiercely claim you when the sky turns dark. The shadows map his face as he settles beside her, supporting his heavy frame just to study her eyes. The second his lips brush her collarbone, the emotional chemistry ignites. Serafina anchors her fists in the sheets, murmuring a fractured blend of languages, signaling her total surrender. It is fascinating how raw instinct takes over the second our exhausted minds let go. Yet, even in this fierce passion, Curado deliberately locks his arms, shifting his weight to ensure absolutely no pressure falls upon their child. When she opens her eyes, the lethal enforcer is completely gone. His expression is stripped of all its famous violence. The life lesson here is profound. True trust is the radical act of letting someone witness the softest, most defenseless fragments of your soul that the world will never see. Witness the terrifying power of true vulnerability. This titan has removed the psychological armor he wears into his daily wars. Seeing this untouchable boss lay himself emotionally bare disrupts her reality far more than any physical touch ever could. The last of her fear dissolves, and she pulls him closer. His movements remain agonizingly slow, an intentional translation of his devotion. Crucially, he refuses to sever their eye contact. His gaze tracks her every breath, grounding her like an iron anchor in a storm. He whispers a broken plea for her to look at him, his voice fracturing under the crushing weight of his buried feelings. She complies without hesitation. The philosophy here is vital. Tearing down your emotional walls to let someone inside requires infinitely more courage than building them ever did. As the scene crests, he remains fiercely tethered to her gaze. The room fills with the tragic energy of two survivors dropping their weapons to find asylum in one another. The tension shatters as she surrenders. Curado lets out a ragged exhale, his frame locking up as if purging a lifetime of violent paranoia in a single second. The defining action happens in the aftermath. He does not retreat into the cold isolation typical of his ruthless world. Instead, he stays anchored against her, his scarred hand sliding down to shield her stomach in the quiet dark. You and I must recognize the ultimate takeaway here. Unbreakable bonds are never forged by simple fate. They are built, brick by brick, through the hard, intentional choices we make in our darkest hours. The camera rests on Serafina as she closes her exhausted eyes. Beside her, this terrifying Don suddenly drops the driest joke. He murmurs that she needs to learn proper Italian because his traditional mother refuses to tolerate street slang. A genuine laugh escapes her lips. It is a messy, broken sound that startles her, bubbling up from the exact same dark corner of her heart where her revenge used to fester. The joy slips right past her armor. He pulls the blankets over them, resting his rough hand gently over hers on her growing stomach, and she finally surrenders to the warmth. There is a profound truth here. When life offers you a moment of peace, fighting it is just another way of punishing yourself. You survived the brutal storm. You owe it to your own soul to feel the sunlight. She curls into his chest, his heavy arm wrapping around her like a reflex. For the first time in years, she sleeps without a single nightmare. But the agonizing reality of finding peace within a cycle of violence is that it is usually just the eerie silence before the floor collapses. We jump forward 3 months. She is living a fragile dream. Her child is growing, protected by a man who stepped up to claim another man's blood. She truly believes she has found her safe haven. Yet the harsh lesson of this tragedy is that building your life on an illusion will always leave you broken. Her false reality shatters on an unnervingly quiet afternoon. Everything burns to ash the absolute second she accidentally pulls open the wrong heavy wooden drawer in his private study. You and I know some buried secrets are heavy enough to crush a soul. The camera pushes in as she finds a hidden envelope bearing her dead former lover's name. The contents are pure poison. She uncovers 3 grainy surveillance photos, a bank receipt, and a frantic scribble. The timestamp is exactly 3 days before the fatal crash, and the signature at the bottom of the hit order belongs to Curado. Sarafina stands frozen. The paper trembles in her hands as her rebuilt reality shatters. She is 7 months pregnant, and a sickening horror hijacks her mind. Is the gentleman who holds her every night actually the cold-blooded monster who murdered the father of her child? The ultimate truth here is devastating. You can never truly outrun the dark ghosts of your past, no matter how fast you drive. Mainstream algorithms despise the bleeding truth of what unfolds next, but you and I are stepping directly into the shadows. Follow the first pinned link in the comments. It is a direct cut to Chapter 2, untouched by commercials that might shatter the suffocating tension. In exactly 5 seconds, we will watch a powerful man finally realize the woman he adores is constructed entirely of vengeance. We are zooming in on the psychology of this tragic, twisted romance. We never cut away from the agonizing frame of betrayal. If there is one simple life lesson you must take from this dark theater, it is this: the soft, gentle hands that stroke your face in the dead of night are sometimes the exact same hands patiently tying the noose around your throat. Keep your eyes open.